Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
I am going to start with the part that still makes my stomach tighten, because if I try to ease into it, I will end up making excuses for them the way I always have. So here it is straight. My birthday came and went without a single word from my family. Not a call, not a text, not even one of those lazy recycled messages they paste every year with the same 3 heart emojis removed to make it look new, and I sat there staring at my phone like a fool who keeps pressing the elevator button. Because maybe the doors will feel guilty and hurry up, and I told myself the things you tell yourself when you have been trained to be patient, that maybe they were busy, that maybe something happened, that maybe there was a mix-up with time zones or calendars or whatever else people reach for when they know the truth but are not ready to say it out loud. I made coffee that morning and pretended to be an adult who does not care about birthdays because grown women are supposed to be above it. Yet you and I both know that is nonsense, because when a family decides your day does not count, it is not about cake or candles or any of that. It is about whether you are seen at all, whether you exist in the system they claim is built on love and showing up, and the silence felt less like a mistake and more like a decision that had been made in a room I was not invited into, a small board meeting where the agenda was me and the resolution was to table it indefinitely. By noon I had done that thing where you try to be the bigger person and send the first text to break the ice, and I typed out something neutral about a funny video my coworker sent, and I hovered over the send button like it was a life raft. Then I deleted it because I felt ridiculous begging for proof that my family could be decent for 1 minute out of the year, and I went on with my day like a person who has learned how to keep moving while holding a heavy box that no one else acknowledges. Which is a skill you pick up when you grow up with a sister like Lily who could sneeze and get a standing ovation while I could organize a whole holiday and be thanked in private like a contractor. It is not like there were no reminders, because my phone kept serving me memories from past birthdays that I had planned for other people, pictures of centerpieces I paid for because Dad said times were tight, screenshots of grocery lists I sent to Mom because she asked me to handle it, and I scrolled through those receipts and felt this slow burn of anger that was not loud or dramatic, more like a pilot light that never goes out. And the more I looked, the more I realized I had always been the person who remembered for everyone else, the person who sent calendar invites and made group chats and kept the whole thing afloat, and apparently the person who could be cut from the cast without the show missing a beat. I gave them the entire day, which in my world is generous, because I know how these people operate, and when the sun went down and nothing changed, I sat on my couch and told myself the truth, that this was not forgetfulness, that this was hierarchy. That this was one more example in a long string of moments where Lily's needs were treated like emergencies and mine were treated like hobbies, and once that thought settled, something inside me clicked into place in a way that felt both calm and dangerous, like I had finally found the switch labeled enough. Before I say what I did, let me be clear about the rule I grew up with, a rule no one wrote down but everyone enforced, which was that family issues must stay inside the house, that you can be hurt, you can be sidelined, you can be taken for granted. But you do not make waves, and you definitely do not hold people accountable in a way that could make anyone uncomfortable. And I have followed that rule for years because I was taught that keeping the peace is a virtue. But that night I looked at that rule and saw it for what it is, a leash dressed up as a bracelet, and I decided to start cutting the threads even if I had to do it one by one. So I opened the shared photo album that I built for everyone, the one they all use when they want to look like a tight unit on social media, the one full of photos I took and edited and labeled so that Aunt Margaret would not tag Dad as our neighbor again. And I removed my name from every contribution I ever made and flipped the permissions so that none of my uploads could be used by anyone for their posts or slideshows or look how blessed captions. And I know that sounds petty, but for me it was not petty at all. It was step one in taking back labor that had been treated like air, invisible yet necessary, and I did it without a single announcement because I wanted the system to break at the exact moment they tried to lean on it. Then I went into my phone settings and turned off location sharing with Mom, because she likes to act like that feature is about safety when we both know it is about managing me like a project. And I removed Dad from my favorites list so his calls would not slice through whatever I was doing, and I muted Lily's notifications because her tone pings me like a smoke alarm even when she is being pleasant. And I pulled up the family group chat and stared at the thread that I named and pinned and kept tidy for years, and I took a breath, not because I was emotional, but because I wanted to mark the moment where I stopped being their unpaid coordinator and started being a person with boundaries. I did not leave the chat yet, not that night, because I wanted to be strategic rather than impulsive, and if you come from a family like mine, you understand that precision is more effective than volume. So instead, I scrolled back through the thread and downloaded a few choice screenshots that reminded me who I am dealing with. The ones where Lily turned my birthday dinner into a planning session for her new apartment. The one where Mom wrote that she could not afford gifts that year and then posted a photo of the watch she bought for Lily, just because, and the one where Dad said he was proud of me in private and then forgot to show up in public, and I saved them in a folder with a plain name because I did not plan to use them yet. But I wanted the truth close at hand for when the rewriting started. By the time I had finished that small round of cleanup, I felt lighter and also strangely focused, like I had finally put both feet on solid ground after years of standing on a rug other people could yank. And in that steady space, I promised myself something very simple that I could actually keep, which was that I would stop handing them easy access to me, that I would stop rescuing the narrative when they messed it up, that I would let the consequences of their choices arrive without me cushioning the fall, and that promise did not feel angry or bitter. It felt like basic maintenance that had been neglected for too long. And here is the part where the hook digs in, because right when I was about to turn off my phone and go to bed with the kind of peace that shows up after you finally act, a new notification popped up that I did not expect. A tag from a cousin I barely speak to anymore, a cheerful little alert that said I had been mentioned in a video, and even before I opened it, I knew in my gut that this was not random, that this was the missing piece that would either make me laugh or make me break. So I tapped the screen and the video started to load, and while it buffered, I made my first silent move of revenge that they would feel in the morning, which was to unpublish the entire shared album and remove my admin rights from every family tool I had built, so that when they went to pull a photo or check an address or download a memory, they would meet a wall and realize the easy path they walked was a path I laid. And then the video finished loading and froze on the first frame, a crowded living room I recognized without wanting to, and I pressed play knowing that whatever I saw next would decide my next move. When the video opened and the sound kicked in, I heard my aunt's voice before I saw anything else, that same high pitch she uses at every family event when she wants everyone to look at the camera and pretend nothing messy ever happens. And she counted down so the whole room could shout surprise for Lily, which might have passed as ordinary if it had been any other week of the year. But it was the week of my birthday that had been treated like a non-event, and as the room erupted with cheers and a chorus of Lily's name stretched into a performance, my brain did the quick math we all do in families where attention is a currency, because it was not just that they were there for her, it was that they had coordinated it, parked their schedules for it, planned a menu, bought decorations, and spread the word, and it made the silence around my day look less like a slip and more like a vote, and even saying that now I can feel how flat it lands, because there is no way to dress it up to make it reasonable. There were little details in the audio that mattered more than any picture, like my mother saying she was glad they could pull it together in time, and my dad laughing about how hard it had been to keep the secret while Lily teased him for almost giving it away. And you know those lines you hear that seem harmless on their own until you place them in the timeline and realize they add up to a truth you had been avoiding, because I had spent all day trying to be rational and now I had a recording that proved rational had been weaponized to make me question my own sense of what happened, and as I listened to relatives congratulate themselves for being a close family, I felt that familiar ache you get when people use the right words to cover the wrong behavior. And I knew that if I confronted them right, then I would end up in the same loop I have been in since I was old enough to stand up for myself, where the point becomes my tone instead of their choices. I let the video play without scrubbing, partly to see if anyone mentioned me and partly to test whether I could finally sit with reality without rephrasing it into something easier to swallow, and no one said my name once, which might sound like a small thing. But in our family, there is always a roll call of who could not make it and why. even when it is fake polite, so the omission screamed louder than any insult they might have slipped, and by the time the final clip ended with Lily thanking everyone and blowing out candles while my mother reminded people not to post anything too obvious, the plan in my head was already forming in clear steps that did not require anyone's permission. Because if they could organize around my absence, then I could organize around theirs. I stared at the pause screen for a minute or two and ran through the usual options. The text that starts with a calm line and ends 3 paragraphs later in a courtroom transcript. The call that gets hijacked by whoever starts crying first. The drive to my parents' house that ends with a lecture about forgiveness and how I take things personally. And I felt the pull of those old patterns because they are familiar and give you the illusion of movement, and then I thought about what actually matters to the people in that video, which is not apologies or insight or fairness. It is access, control, and the ability to present a united front, and I realized the most effective move would be one they would call petty while feeling it in their teeth, which is usually how you know it is surgical rather than loud. So I opened my messages and, instead of blasting the video back with a paragraph about the dates, I went straight to the infrastructure, the part of the machine I had built and maintained for years, because I was the only one who could be bothered. And I started with the family group I created in the app that my parents understand, the one that has a name I came up with and an icon I set and a description I wrote reminding everyone to keep addresses updated, and I tapped into the settings and stripped myself of admin rights just long enough to hand them to a cousin who loves the spotlight until something breaks, and then I left the group with no farewell, not because I was trying to make a scene, but because leaving quietly is the thing they never expect from me. And I watched the thread disappear from my list like a file closing after years of being open. I did the same with the smaller groups that run the family engine, the siblings chat where Lily directs every conversation toward her deadlines and expects applause for meeting them. The parents chat that was supposedly for logistics, but always turned into a feedback channel for their mood of the day. The cousins thread that exists to rally people to events I plan. And in the ones I had created, I used the minute of admin power to set the description to a neutral line about contacting someone else for future coordination, because I did not want chaos for chaos's sake. I wanted distance, and then I removed myself from each one with a steady hand and no commentary, and the lack of commentary is what hurt them most later, though I did not know it yet. Before I closed the apps, I made one more change that mattered more than anything I could have said, which was to adjust my phone settings so read receipts were off and calls from unknown numbers went straight to voicemail. And I created a simple rule that sent any message containing certain family names into a folder I would check on my schedule instead of theirs, and I know that sounds cold. But what is actually cold is expecting one person to hold the entire network together and then pretending she is overreacting when she stops, and if that sounds harsh, it is because I am done apologizing for the labor everyone enjoyed while pretending it was automatic. If you are wondering whether leaving those groups and turning off those settings felt like revenge or self-respect, the truth is that it felt like both. Because I am not going to pretend there was no satisfaction in watching the channels go silent on my end after years of being pinged for errands and favors and last-minute decisions that I would fix because I could. And I am not going to pretend I did not grin a little at the thought of Lily trying to rally people for her next thing without the person who quietly kept her life organized, and maybe you think I should have slept on it or called first or done it with a speech, and maybe on a different day I would have. But I had 24 hours of silence and a video full of people congratulating themselves for being there for one another, and sometimes the only way to get clarity is to remove yourself from the echo and see who bothers to cross the room. I powered the phone down and placed it face down on the table, which I almost never do because I am the kind of person who stays reachable for work and for emergencies, and for the million small requests that come from being the reliable one. And I stood up and felt that strange mix of relief and dread you get when you finally push a door that has been stuck for years, and it swings open without a fight, and I told myself that the next day would be whatever it was, and that I would not rescue anyone from the discomfort of their own choices, and then, just before bed, I remembered the cousin who had tagged me, and I sent her a short Polite note asking her to untag me from the video because I did not want to be associated with events that excluded me, which was not meant as a shot across the bow but landed like one anyway. And as I turned off the light, I heard my phone vibrate once even though it was on silent, which made no sense until I saw the missed call from a number I did not recognize and a new voicemail with my mother's voice on it, and I did not press play, not yet, because I wanted to hear it in the morning when everything I had just done would start to matter. I listened to the voicemail the next morning because I wanted a clear head and a full picture before I made any more moves, and hearing my mother try to braid concern with control in the same breath told me everything I needed to know. Because she started with the line about being worried and not sleeping, and then slid right into the lecture about how leaving the group had confused everyone and made things harder, and how I should have called before I did anything rash, and she ended with that familiar closer about family being all we have, which would land differently if family had actually shown up for me when it counted, and I let the message play out without pausing or reacting. Because I knew that the minute I engaged I would be pulled into the old pattern where my tone becomes the headline and the actual issue gets buried under diplomacy that always seems to protect the people in power rather than the person who is hurt. I set the phone down and watched the notifications start flooding in anyway, because even with filters on and rules in place the volume found a way to seep through, and it was the usual mix of relatives who play both sides asking if I was okay. Cousins trying to be funny about me being dramatic, my father with a brief note about not making a big deal out of a misunderstanding, and Lily with an upbeat paragraph that sounded like a press release written by someone who thinks charisma can replace accountability, and the whole stream felt like a carefully staged rescue mission designed to pull me back into the network with a smile and a shrug, and as I scrolled I realized that the thing they were most upset about was not my feelings or even my absence. It was the fact that I had removed the access and the structure that made their lives easy, which is why every message contains some flavor of please come back to the chat, or we need to coordinate, or can you post that address again. I took a slow breath and reminded myself that my plan only works if I do not argue the obvious, because the obvious is not in dispute. The video already settled that. So instead of typing a thesis, I opened the folder of screenshots I saved and looked at them like a mechanic checks a toolbox, not because I was going to send them, but because I wanted to anchor myself in evidence when the rewriting started. And right on cue, Lily sent a long text that used the word timing 3 times in 2 sentences and pitched the party as something that had been on the calendar for ages, as if that somehow made it less insulting that it landed right on my week, and she wrapped it with a breezy line about doing something for me soon. Which is the sort of vague promise people make when they want to paper over a hole rather than fix the foundation. If this were any other year, this is the moment when I would have written a measured response and given everyone an exit ramp, because I was raised to keep the unit intact even at my expense, but I am done paying penalties for peace other people get to enjoy. So I chose a different approach that would register exactly where they live, because in our family control is not just emotional, it is logistical, and for years I have quietly carried the subscriptions and the shared accounts that everyone treats like public utilities, which means I have leverage they forgot I had, and it turns out the cleanest revenge is sometimes as simple as closing a tab that should never have been on your credit card in the first place. I opened the streaming services I have been covering since the last holiday when my parents insisted it would be too complicated to split the cost, and I updated every password, logged out all devices, removed every auxiliary profile that had sprung up like weeds with cutesy names to hide who was using what, and toggled off family sharing on the platforms that let me do it with one click. And then I went into the cloud storage plan where I had been footing the bill for shared photo backups. Because everyone kept losing phones and blaming me for not having redundancies, and I took the plan back down to a single user and saved the confirmation before anyone could claim it was a glitch. And for dessert, I opened the household shopping membership they use for free shipping and took everyone off the roster, not out of spite, but out of a sudden and overdue commitment to stop funding people who cannot remember my birthday, but can remember my login. While I was working through that list, the messages shifted tone in real time the way they always do when the easy conveniences start to sputter. Because Lily's chirpy texts gave way to increasingly clipped notes about not being able to log in and whether I had changed something and how she had people coming by that evening to watch a premiere, and this was not a good time for me to be difficult. And my father tried the calm authority voice about solving this like adults and not punishing the group for one misunderstanding, and my mother left a second voicemail that managed to combine hurt, outrage, and a logistical request in under a minute, and I let every single one of them stack up unanswered. Because the point was not to punish anyone individually, the point was to end a system where I paid and they decided. If you think I took pleasure in the scramble, I did, and I will not pretend otherwise, not because I enjoy seeing anyone inconvenienced, but because there is a specific relief in watching the true lines of dependence reveal themselves when the person who has been told she is too sensitive quietly steps back, and it felt honest in a way conversations with my family never do. Since conversations are where everything gets blurred by tone and history and someone's selective memory, while a login screen is very clear about who has the key and who does not, and I needed clarity more than I needed anyone to like me that morning. To keep from caving to the immediate noise, I set a 30-minute timer and told myself I would not read any messages until it went off. Then I made myself breakfast like a normal person and answered work emails and reminded myself that living my own day is not a crime even if my family treats it like one. And when the timer buzzed, I scanned the new batch and saw that the cousins had started a side thread to figure out what was going on, which was perfect because delegating confusion is the first step toward everyone realizing I am not the only adult capable of organizing a calendar, and sprinkled between the confusion were a few quiet messages from people who have noticed this pattern for years, but never said anything. Simple notes like "I see you" and "I am sorry" and "Do you want to talk?" and I save those because they matter. The last thing I did before closing the phone again was make a single, surgical move I had been sitting on for years, which was to reroute the family contact email I created ages ago for event RSVPs and emergencies. Because it has always forwarded to me and only me while everyone pretended it was a shared responsibility, and I redirected it to Lily's address with a clean auto-reply that said the account was now monitored by her for all family coordination. And I logged out, and the moment I did, my phone lit up with a message from Lily that skipped right past charm and went straight to the point, accusing me of making her look bad and asking what I wanted to end this drama, and I smiled without typing a word. Because for once I was not negotiating under their terms, and because my answer was not going to be delivered by text at all. By mid-morning the day after the voicemail, once the first wave of frantic texts and calls had burned through their opening script and revealed the familiar pivot from worry to accusation to logistics, I decided that if I kept letting them set the channel and the tempo, I would be back to writing speeches no one wanted to hear and carrying loads no one wanted to see. So instead of drafting a paragraph that could be dissected for tone, I sat down with a notebook and wrote out the only 3 outcomes I would accept. Not because I believed they would meet them cheerfully, but because without a clear set of terms I knew I would end up bargaining with myself the way I always do when a parent sighs or my sister starts listing all the reasons attention has to tilt toward her this season. And once I had the list on paper in words I could not wiggle around, I felt the kind of focus you get when you finally name a thing you have been tiptoeing around for years. The first term was simple enough to fit on one line and still carry weight, because it was about acknowledgement rather than theater, and it said that I wanted a public apology in the same space where the party had been showcased, posted by the people who planned it, in words that owned the choice and did not hide behind timing or misunderstanding, and before you roll your eyes and tell me apologies on the internet do not fix anything, let me say that in my family the only public facts that ever seem to stick are the ones that get packaged as announcements. So if they were happy to stage a surprise for my sister and congratulate themselves for being a tight unit, then they could use that same stage to admit that they made a choice that cut me out. Because I am done being the only one who knows what happened. The second term was less romantic and more practical, which is where most of my resentment lives anyway, and it said that I wanted repayment for a short list of recurring costs I had carried for years under the flag of keeping things simple, which included the streaming accounts, the shared cloud backup, the family shopping membership, and the event deposits I had put down for upcoming holidays because no one else wanted the responsibility, and before anyone starts with the line about family not keeping score, please understand that only the people not doing the work ever say that, and I was not sending an invoice to punish them. I was handing back the bill for conveniences that had been treated like air while doubling as a constant reminder that my effort was expected even when my existence was optional. The third term was the only one that mattered long term, and it said that going forward I would not coordinate, host, finance, or rescue any family event, thread, or system unless I chose to for reasons that sounded good to me. And that the standing assumption that I would fix what other people dropped would be retired for a period of at least a year, because I needed a real reset and not another weekend where I do all the work while people tell me how naturally organized I am. And I put a date on that year, so I would not let them talk me into cutting it short the first time a holiday loomed and someone decided I must be over it by now. I typed those 3 terms into a clean, plain document without any decoration or commentary and attached a brief note that was about as unemotional as I can be when I care deeply, saying that I was stepping back and these were the conditions for me to consider stepping forward again, and that any conversation about tone or wording would be ignored because the words were not a puzzle but a boundary. And I printed a copy for my parents and a copy for my sister because I knew that screen messages disappear into the fog of interpretation while paper sits on a table like a small stubborn fact, and I drove by their houses and placed the envelopes where they would find them without giving anyone the satisfaction of ringing a bell and being pulled into a scene. Then I came home and, with that same calm that felt foreign and steady at the same time, I executed the next round of choices that would make my terms feel real rather than performative. Because nothing undermines a boundary faster than leaving all the doors propped open. So I logged into the reservation site where I had put down deposits for the holiday rental that everyone loves to claim and no one loves to book. And I canceled it before the penalty window closed so that I was not eating a charge for a gathering I would no longer organize, and I sent the cancellation number to my own email so there would be no tale later about how I sabotaged anything last minute. And I moved through the utilities of our family life like a quiet auditor undoing shortcuts, which included removing my credit card from the shared ride account my father uses whenever he forgets his wallet, deleting my profile from the group calendar that always defaulted to my time zone because I was the only one who could be bothered to fix daylight saving, and archiving the countless folders in the photo drive that I had curated like a museum, while other people treated it like a magic shelf that refills itself. As I pulled those threads, the messages shifted shape in the way anyone who has ever held a boundary recognizes immediately, because my mother cycled from concern to scolding to the soft guilt that used to pull me back when I was younger. My father tried the managerial tone about being rational and not letting a small thing snowball into permanent consequences, and my sister, who had opened the day with a breezy ask to talk, suddenly became urgent and transactional, asking what I wanted and how much, and whether we could just call it even if they did something for me next month, which made me laugh out loud in a way that was not cruel, but was very clear, because the point was not a future favor that would be framed as generosity. The point was owning what you did and then living with the results, and if that sounded harsh, it was only because I was finally saying it without apology. I did allow myself one small public gesture that would register in the exact part of their brains that cares about optics, not because I wanted to embarrass anyone, but because I am done with secrecy that protects the wrong people. So I posted a simple note on my own page thanking the friends and coworkers who had remembered my birthday and made it a good week in spite of everything, without any names or hints or pointed barbs, and the reaction was immediate because, in our family, any public omission translates into a private scramble, and while they spun up a story in their side channels about me seeking attention, I enjoyed the steady stream of comments from the people who actually show up. And I let that be the chorus in my ear instead of the familiar hum of needing to make sure everyone else is comfortable. By late afternoon, Lily stopped pretending we were doing a normal, polite exchange and sent a sharp message that said I was making her look bad and that this had gone far enough and that she was willing to post something if it meant I would stop. as if I were staging a spectacle and not simply refusing to participate in one, and I did not respond to that either, because I have learned that any reply to that tone becomes the evidence they use to claim I escalated, so instead I did one last surgical thing that would make the immediate future very clear to the people who rely on me without quite admitting it, which was to send a single BCC email to the extended family addresses that always seem to involve me when a reunion needs to be organized, letting them know that I was taking a year off from coordination, that any future planning would be handled by Lily, and that I would attend events if and when I chose to, which was not a rallying cry or a call-out, it was a factual update to the people who have learned to default to me. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was not loud, it was structural, because by the time I closed my laptop, every route they used to outsource responsibility had been rerouted back to the people who benefit most, and every pathway they used to reach me had been narrowed to a single lane they could not control, and within minutes of that email leaving my outbox, my phone lit up with a new voicemail from my father that sounded different from the others, lower and flatter, asking me to meet him and my mother for dinner because there were things I did not understand and because family is not supposed to be transactional, and just as I was deciding whether I would go and on what terms, a notification popped up from Lily that was not a text at all, but a calendar invite with a subject line that made me laugh and then sharpen my focus, because it said family meeting to resolve drama, and it was scheduled at a time I would never agree to in a place that is convenient only for them, and I stared at it and knew exactly how I would answer without sending a single word. When Lily's calendar invite arrived with that bossy subject line and a time that cut straight through my workday in a location that saves them a commute and costs me a chunk of sanity, I stared at it long enough to let the old reflex warm up. The one where I start bending my life into the shape of their convenience, and then I did something I should have practiced years ago, which was to decline without explanation and send a single, quiet reply that said the meeting could happen after the 3 terms were met and not a minute before, and because I know how they treat anything that lives only on a screen, I attached the same printed page I had dropped at their houses, a simple sheet with 3 lines, an apology posted publicly where the party had been showcased, repayment for the specific recurring costs I had been carrying, and a full year without me coordinating, hosting, financing, or rescuing, and I added one more line that I had not written before because I had not trusted myself to enforce it, which was a plain deadline of 72 hours from that moment, not to be dramatic, but to keep myself from wandering back into endless negotiation, and with that sent, I put on shoes, grabbed my bag, and left the apartment to run normal errands like a person who refuses to spend another day trapped in someone else's group chat. I got 3 blocks before my father's name lit up the screen, and I let it roll to voicemail because there is nothing he can say in a moving car that he cannot say in a chair with a receipt on the table. And then my mother texted a single sentence that tried to sound reasonable while tugging all the old wires, something about not airing family matters in public and about how an apology posted online would only make things worse, which slid off me this time because I could finally see how that sentence has kept every truth in our family off the record, and while the little pings kept coming, I walked into the bank and, with more steadiness than I expected, used the feature that lets you send payment requests with a description line. And I sent one to my parents for the cloud and the streaming and the membership and the deposits, and another to Lily for the rides and the last-minute event costs I covered because someone forgot a wallet or an RSVP, and I typed plain notes in the memo. That would be hard to spin later, not accusations, just item names and dates, and I left the branch feeling like I had taken a set of keys off a hook I never should have been given in the first place. By early evening, when they realized I was not going to show up to a meeting built around their calendar and their comfort, the calls switched over to a new tone. The one that promises discussion and suggests compromise and tries to lure you into the room where everyone suddenly remembers polite words. And I heard enough of my father's voicemail to know he was reaching for the script about proportionality and about not turning a small oversight into a permanent fracture, and I turned it off. Because I have spent enough holidays inside that exact thought, minimizing myself to keep the unit intact while also working the stove and the spreadsheet and the guest list, and I reminded myself that I had not asked for a grand gesture or a parade. I had asked for ownership, restitution, and rest, which should not require me to present a legal case for why I matter. On the second morning, with the clock ticking in a way only I could hear because I was the only one enforcing it, I sent the final nudge, not a threat or a dig. Just a message to Lily that responded to her last burst of spin with a single sentence that said I would not be available to manage any fallout from missed reservations, expired logins, or confused relatives because those systems no longer belong to me. And in case she had missed it, the extended family had already been told she was the point of contact for coordination, which is when she dropped the veneer and told me flat out that I was making her look awful and that people were messaging her nonstop and that the optics were brutal and would I please just say something to calm everyone down. And I sat there on my couch, elbows on my knees like I was bracing myself for a storm that had already passed, and I typed the only 2 words I planned to give her that week, exactly how, and then I put the phone down and let the silence say that the shape of her answer was the entire point. An hour later a cousin sent a link without commentary, and when I opened it I saw a stiff, careful post on the platform where the party had been turned into a family highlight reel. A short paragraph written by Lily and co-signed by my parents that said an important person had been left out and that it was not a mistake, but a choice made for convenience that hurt in ways they had not respected, followed by a line about making it right and taking a step back from asking the same person to carry everyone's load, and it was not poetry and it was not warm and it did not say my name because they can be brave only in measured doses, yet it was finally on the record, which is more than I had ever gotten from tearful kitchen speeches about how we love in our own way, and while the comments filled with relatives and friends doing their polite nodding, my banking app chimed with 2 confirmations. One from my parents for the exact amount I had requested and one from Lily with a note that read, "Paid in full," which made me laugh because I have never once heard those words applied to me in that house. I could end the story right there and claim a clean win, but the part that actually changed my life did not happen on their page or on my phone. It happened an hour later when my father asked again for dinner and promised a conversation without theatrics. And I picked a day that worked for me and a place near my office, and I walked in with nothing in my hands except my own terms held lightly, and I listened while they worked through the familiar steps, the timeline revision, the reasons that sound logistical until you line them up, the worries about how it might look to people if apologies live online permanently, and when they ran out of air I said, without tremor and without ornament, that I heard them and I believed they were not trying to be cruel. But what happened did not require intent to count, and that the terms they had met were not a pass back into my calendar. They were a receipt for what had already been taken, and that I was going to enjoy my year of distance and I would see them when I chose to, and if anyone tried to pull me back with guilt I would show them their own post and their own transfers, because sometimes the only way to stop being the historian of a family's private mistakes is to put a date on the public record and walk away. They tried one more time with the language of fresh starts and letting bygones be bygones and keeping things off the internet, and I nodded in a way that made it clear I was done holding their feelings higher than my own boundaries, and I stood up first. Which never happens in our family because the person who leaves first gets framed as the one who escalated, and I hugged my mother in the quick, awkward way you hug someone you are not ready to forgive, and thanked my father for dinner in the tone you use with a colleague you will not be taking calls from after hours, and I walked out feeling neither triumphant nor cruel, just steady, which is a word I have not earned often enough in my own life. And when I reached the street my phone buzzed with a final text from Lily that said a short thank you with a dot, and I did not answer because I had nothing left to explain. In the weeks after, the quiet held, not because they became different people overnight, but because access had been rerouted and the demand signals no longer landed on my desk, and every time I was tempted to soften the edges the way I always do, I would open their post and my receipts and remind myself that this was not a tantrum but a reset, and when distant relatives asked what happened I told them the only version that keeps me honest, which is that I stopped organizing a life that did not include me, and that if anyone wants me at the table they can pull up a chair with their actions instead of their slogans, and if that sounds cold, maybe it is, but there is a heat in finally choosing yourself that leaves almost no room for pity, only a strange Durable calm that lets you drink your coffee in the morning without checking 3 family threads before the cup cools. If you're waiting for the twist where I cave or they backslide or we sweep it under a new rug, I do not have that for you. Not because perfect endings exist, but because for once the ending is not a door slamming or a speech shouted over a crosstalk of old grievances. It is a door that I closed softly and locked with a key I made for myself, which I keep in my pocket now. And when I think about my birthday, I do not replay the video or the captions or the parts of me that want it to be chosen. I think about the 72 hours where I chose myself, and about how the apology and the repayment were not the victory but the evidence, and about how the actual win was the boundary that stayed put after the noise faded. And if that sounds like a small thing, then you have never lived your life at the mercy of people who call control love, because the most satisfying revenge I have ever taken was learning that I could turn off the music and still hear my own voice, clear, steady, and finally, in charge of my own volume.